So here we have our most basic setup in Unity. I've created my FBX folder, I've exported my meshes, I've drug them in here. Everything's here and ready for materials. So while I've said in most of my other videos that I personally don't do a set mesh and follow that general workflow, I am going to do that for this because I do think that it's the easiest way to explain most of this. I'm using the V4 satellite theme. I'm not changing anything about that. So when I do this, it's going to ask me to save it. No problem. Just replace it. And it's going to go through my set mesh. Okay, I've resumed the recording now that the set mesh is done. You can see that all my splines have changed. Let's call them meshes actually. Now why are they white? Well, the simple answer is because as a base color, it's trying to use a satellite. It's a sat shader, but we haven't actually added the sat to any of the materials. So if we look at this green, we can see in the green sat, this is where it's looking for its base texture, right here. So we have nothing defined. Now, if we use one of the defaults that we already have, or not defaults, if we use one of the satellites that we captured in the LiDAR process, whether or not it was a LiDAR you did or a package you received, if you look in your terrain backup folder, which is usually where they are, and just pick one, it'll at least show us what we're looking at. So let's just use the Bing one for now and drop it in there. And we're going to do the same thing with, this is a fairway. So we're going to grab the fairway, expand it, look for satellite, and use the exact same one, the Bing shifted. Now, it doesn't look correct, right? The reason is both of these materials need to have your terrain size. I know that my terrain size for this plot is 2800, and once I hit that, you'll see everything line up. I'll add it here as well. Now, what you see is our fairway and our green using a sat. We haven't done anything to it, so these are actually the shadows from the trees. If you looked at the overhead, here's a fairway that's pretty clean. It doesn't have anything going on. This is a rough shape. Let's grab that. This is the other one we're going to use sat with. You can see there's nothing there. I'm going to go Bing shifted, and again change it to whatever your terrain size is. All right. Now we should see everywhere that there's a fairway or a green, we have sat shading happening. Now, it looks awful because we have done nothing to it. So let's look at how are we going to adjust this. And maybe the better thing to talk about first is why some of these shapes are still white and how my theory for this particular course is going to work on this. I am only going to use sat, I think, on the rough, the fairway, and the green. So some of these other shapes we can immediately just change. This is a pine straw. Well, it says it's a pine straw. I'm going to eventually change it to a mulch, like a bark mulch. But these are manicured beds. So I don't want to use satellite for this, not necessarily. So I'm going to go down in the channel texture setup for my material, and I'm going to remove sat as the base. And because this is the pine straw material, it's going to default to a pine straw texture that I can change later. Then I'm going to go to my deep rough. I'm also not going to use sat for that because most of the places that are deep rough are tree covered or will eventually become lawns for homes, which I can use a different texture for. Or they're going to have long grass planted on them. They're going to be mostly covered up with tree coverage though. So the way to change the colors on these things, there's a couple different ways. I don't know how many people actually play with this stuff, but there are so many options in here. Right now, everything is a red vertex color. There's no vertex painting that's happened. So the only channel we're looking at is red. You can change the red overall color by using this spot, or you can change the base color or the detail color. If you change detail, it's only going to affect what is the detail distance, which is way up in this area. I'd already changed this to 5,000. It defaults to something like maybe 12. So only 12 yards from the camera would that matter. So if I change this to 12, and I go down here and I change just the detail color tint right here, you're going to see it only happens near the camera. And then we're going to go, let's see, what did I do wrong here? All right, so now that I've changed my detail tint, let's make it a little bit more extreme. If I go up here to I have my distance only set at 12. If I go to the opacity, you're going to see that that color change only happens within this distance to the camera, this number right here. So what I had done is I had set this 5,000 because I wanted to cover everything. So now if I crank up my opacity, that color would come through all the way. But I don't really need that. And in fact, I'm going to make sure, as this is a deep rough, the more influential color is going to be either base color or red overall, because our detail opacity is so low that you're not seeing that much of the color. So I'm going to go with overall, and I want this to be, I'm going to have to experiment a little bit, but I want this to be kind of a real brownish, you know, but you get the idea. So that's kind of what I'm going for. Now later on, when I edit the sat shader texture in Photoshop, that's when I'll start matching colors up. The other item you see on here that is currently white, this is my semi-rough cut. And I do not use sat on that. It's a really good idea not to. I know that that's gone over in other videos, so I'm just going to go over it here too as to why. I think it was probably DP Roberts that talked about it. What happens when you're cloning out sat shapes? So when you're in Photoshop and you're pushing your fairway clone stamp or your rough clone stamp, it's impossible to get them to meet exactly where there's a material line because there's always going to be bleed over. What's nice about using a no sat for your semi-rough, if you turn that off, is that because it's not pulling sat image, you can have that blend or that slight bleed over on your sat texture happening in that space, and it will not be seen. All right. I'm actually going to turn off my sat for greens. I don't like to use it on greens either. If you think about the reason you use a sat shader, it's for some natural variance to the color and the cut of the grass and things like that. But I can achieve that on a green just with vertex painting a lot easier with a lot more control. So what I will end up doing is you'll end up adding in things like cut lines and those options underneath whatever channel you're working on. So, you know, if you want to do the mow lines and things like that, you do those down here. Let's see, where are we going to put that at? Mow line, age, opacity. You know, so if you're going for a mow line, you'd be doing it down here. Let's see. Oh, I got that. That's why I can't see it. It's huge right now. So, there we go. And then, you know, that's something you can easily add through the materials. You don't need to use a sat shader for it. And later on, and in some other videos, I show how you can add some variation to it without needing to do things like a sat shader for brown out areas or stuff like that. So really, it boils down to I'm using the sat shader in the fairway and in the rough. And that's pretty much it for this course. There are some like the fold, which my other sat shading video does that. Much satellite use in that. It's all prairie grass. So from overhead, that sat shader and that natural look really makes a difference. But on something that's super tree lined and things like that, not as important for your deep rough. Personal choice. You do whatever makes sense for your course. All right. Let's jump into Photoshop and take a look at how we set up the actual sat material, or how I do it, and I'll give you some tips in there. All right, here's my Photoshop file. If I zoom out, you can see that this is my sat, and there's already a couple layers here. What I have here is both my Apple satellite view and my Bing satellite view. It was hard to choose between the two. The Google one is not very good. A lot of winter kill, didn't look great. The reason it's hard to choose, and I can't tell you how to pick, it's going to depend on what your images look like. The Apple view, it's very clean because it's a very overhead sun. Not as many shadows, right? But the conditions on the course are not as good. I feel like with my Photoshop skills, that's something I can fix, but I'm not entirely sure this is the view I'm going to use. I like the Bing one. If I hide this, the Bing one has a much cleaner look. While it looks a little desaturated, a little bit dry, that's a very easy fix in Photoshop. Much easier to fix that than to make this look like a lush summer day, but there's a ton more shadows going on in this view. Overall, this course in particular is going to be very difficult for satellite work. It's going to take a long time no matter what. But right now, I feel like the Apple view just a little bit easier to work with because there's less shadows going on. And I can do some work on how patchy and brown it looks. That's probably easier to recover from. The next thing you want to do, you export your splines as an EPS or a PNG, as a PNG, and you bring that into Photoshop and you copy and paste it. Make sure that the image size is exactly the same. If you were to look at I'll just open it, pretend I haven't put that overlay in my stat yet. So I'm going to open this PNG file. You want to make sure under image size that if you need to, see this comes in as 10583 for some reason. You want to change that to the exact same, which in this case would be 8192. So you want to make sure that you change that to the exact same size as your satellites. And your satellites are almost always going to be, or should be, 8192. Then you copy and paste that in, and it should line up perfectly. Now you can see that you can hide it or swap it, and all your stuff should line up right. The next step for me is I like to make saved selections because that makes it very easy for me to work in just specific areas. So the way to do that is with your spline image active, I go to select color range, and then I end up saving a selection. In this case, let's see, I think I already did the rough. I'm going to go select load selection just to check. And yeah, I already did the rough, so I'm going to do the fairway next because that's one of the other ones I'm using for a sat view. So select color range and then grab your color of your fairways. You can see in this that it's going to show you kind of a preview. It's a little hard to see because it's a small image, so it's a little dicey. This slider and this number is how many shades of that green beyond that exact color is it going to select. So if this is at 0, it's going to grab that exact color, but if you go in, you can see these pixels are not all perfectly the same color, so it's not going to get maybe quite to the edge you want. It's going to depend. I have found generally somewhere between 30 and 50 is a good number. You don't want too much, but if you keep zooming in and check, that's pretty close to our line, right? And we're going to need a little buffer. This semi-rough is not going to be sat. So then I'm going to go select, modify, expand by 1 pixel, and that's going to bump it out. So now anywhere I clone stamp, I'm going to have fairway that's actually bigger than the fairway. It's going to go into the semi-rough, but that's what we want because we're not going to use satellite for the semi-rough. And this way we know we've got all the fairway. So now that my color range is selected, it should have selected all your fairways. Then you just go select, save selection, and I name it fairway, right? That's all my fairways. Right now, my plan is only to do those two for satellite. Like I said, I'm not going to do the deep rough. So now I can actually hide this, or sometimes I like to change this opacity down so I can kind of get an idea. But then I can hide this and I can go to town cloning. You can see that depending on which satellite view you're using and which one you use to draw your splines, it might not match up as well. It might match up very well. So now we're going to start doing our work on cloning and stamping and all that stuff that is going to give us a better look. It might be, man, I keep going back and forth. I don't know which one of these I want to use. Maybe I'll try using Bing just because it's a little easier to see right now for this video. So going through and doing the cloning and stamping to erase things like trees is just tedious work, right? Let's go to somewhere small, an area that's not hard. So you can see this fairway is pretty clean. There's a little bit of a shadow going on over here. So we're going to grab somewhere to clone from. So you've got this vertical cut going on. So this is all just artistic. Grab somewhere and you can see it shows you what it's going to stamp. Try and line it up so it looks like it fits. And now we've erased that shadow. And it's just that. It's that over and over and over again until you feel like you've cloned out what you want. Let's go up to this fairway. This one's got a different cut on it. You can see our green is not quite as pronounced there. So we're going to grab just some green spot like that. Get rid of those shadows. It's just going to be a whole lot of this. Try and pick areas that look similar to what you have. And you don't even have to pick from this hole. Try and find somewhere where the cut and the mow line matches a bit. Or if you've got you notice a spot on your course that has a nice clean area you can clone from that's the same color, you can grab that and then come back. Alright, so let's grab that. And I like to do from a variety of places, so it's not all, you don't start seeing repeating patterns and things like that. Alright, that's pretty good. That just feels pretty decent. So that was the fairway on this hole. You can see it's a little dark back here. Grab that. Alright, now if we switch and we load our rough, like that, this is where it's going to be tougher because we've got all these trees in our way, right? So let's look around our course. Let's see if we can find any areas of rough without trees. Something that we can draw from. So this has some pretty pronounced mow lines, which is going to make it a little tough to use. But we're just looking for anywhere. Here's a pretty open area of rough, right? So I sampled from that area. Now I'm going to come in here, clone out there like that. All right. So you can kind of see the start of how we're doing things. I'm not going to make a 2-hour video of me zooming around and clone stamping a bunch of stuff. I'd like to tell you there's a magic trick to it all, but there's not. You're going to be just doing a lot of kind of tedious work. It's just going to be trying to figure out what parts of your course match the area you want to stamp in and what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of. Now you can see right here where I splined this bunker is inside where the actual bunker shape is. If we look at that in here, that's going to show by, you can see that there's a white sand bleed into the rough there, right? So whenever we see a bunker, we're definitely going to want to try and basically clone it out. If you wanted to, you could clone so much that the bunker just disappears, but what's just important is that you make sure that you get most of the sand colors that's out in the rough out of there, right? So that's pretty good. All right. I'm actually going to leave some of this fairway darkness around the outside. That's not a big deal because I'm going to vert paint that away. That's in my other video that I talk more about that. But for now, let's just do a quick save on this. Let we're going to go, you need to do save a copy or the shortcut, which is Alt-Control-S. And I like to do, we're going to do a JPEG in that same folder, and I like to name it with the capital letters overlay, and that just reminds me that, hey, that's the one I want to use as my SAT. So once that's done saving, we'll go back into Unity. And remember, what we were using was the Bing one. So we're going to have to go up here and we're going to change to the one I named overlay, right? And then same with this one. We'll switch to the overlay. And you can see in that one, those shadows are gone. Should have changed it in this one too. That little corner of a shadow is gone there. Like that. Now to try and make things look greener or match up better with your vision for a course, you can either do that in Photoshop by painting over layers. Like, let's see, right now we have, let's see, this is our rough that is selected right now. But we're going to use an adjustment layer. Let's do that. So we're going to deselect everything. We're going to go down here. These are all Photoshop tricks. I'm not going to go through learning all of Photoshop, but this is some things you can do. If we add a hue saturation layer, we can change the overall color of everything on the course at once, like that. Try and green up the rough a little bit. But you can also add, this is a blank layer. We can do tricks like come in here with a brush that's got a green color attached to it. So we've selected green. You could go in and you can paint. Let's actually do this. Let's select, load our rough like that. And we're going to try and make this rough a little nicer and lusher looking. And I'm going to paint kind of more around where the fairway edges and green edges, because I feel like those are the areas the sprinkler is going to hit the most, right? And then experiment with your layer blend. So if we do, usually something like a color darken is a good choice. Let's go darker color. We're going to change our blending mode to something a little bit darker like that. Alright, so now that that color's changed, you can see we've kind of started matching up compared to some of these other areas. And you can do the same thing with your fairways. Maybe you want all your fairways to be a little darker. So if we loaded our fairway thing, what you could do is you could just edit. All right, here, let's do this. Let's go fill. Or do we want to just do, how do we want to do this? Yeah, we're just going to fill. So we're going to go edit, fill. And we're going to go with our foreground color, which is this green, or you could change it. So that's going to go all that. And I'm thinking maybe we're going to use like a, go with an overlay. And we don't want much at all. So we're just going to, we're going to turn that down. And I probably should have put it on a separate layer, but yeah, I should have put that on a separate layer. Because this one, we're going to name this is our rough adjustments. We're going to create a new layer. This one's going to be our fairway. There we go. I'm going to change this to an overlay. We're going to bring it way down. So now if we hide that, you can see we're just tinting it just a little bit. It's almost a little too green, but if you control the hue and saturation, you can. So, I mean, now you've got a very different look than what we started with, right? You can see in this area where I've already touched up the rough that if you look at the other sat, it looks a little beat up. And you can apply that same technique like on that Apple satellite. If I enable that again, you know, that one was very, there's a lot of browns and it's, you know, that will take more work, but it would be a similar style to this, working on that. So let's save this out as our JPEG and load it in. Watch it update. And now we've got, it's a lot greener now, right? It looks a lot closer to what we want. And then what we're going to do here is you can always play with colors in here as well. So if we go in here to our fairway, it's using that satellite, but maybe we want to help it with the greens. This is another way that we can go in and add, you know, some colorization that way. And it's just going to be a back and forth depending on how you want to balance it. This is very dark, you know, compared to the other, and it is on the satellite, that is the way it looks, but you might want to adjust that just so that it matches a little better. You don't have to be tied to what the satellite looks like. You can pretty much adjust anything through Photoshop. And then what we've got is we probably want our rough to definitely be a bit darker than it is, because the rough should look a little, you know, so then you're going to go in and fix that up. And then this, remember, the semi-rough is a non-satellite, it's not pulling any color from the satellite. So your job with this one is to use the overall color adjustment to try and make it look natural and like it's something that's a light rough, that's something in between these other two. Because that's going to be your bridge, right? That's your bridge shape. All right. Now to get these to match if they don't, what you do is you use the material channel editor and you tell it that you want to match your fairway to your blend fairway. And I believe that's red, right? So you're moving why is it not updating that? Red to you know what's going on here is we haven't assigned the satellite. That's why that's white. Just like the other ones, we have to go in on our blend and at 2800, but we haven't adjusted our satellite there, so we need to end the same satellite over. So once we add the satellite overlay to that one, the same way we added it to everything else, should match up. There we go. That's what I forgot. There. So now we have, and now that I look at it, you know, you can say, okay, it's probably needs to be a little darker now that I can see it up against there. You can use that. You can use these, are really nice to kind of there we go. That's not too bad. So now there's a lot more playing to do, because you can see, remember I painted up here. Remember that I added some green there. I did not do that down here, so it looks ridiculous. There's a ton more work to go on satellite. And then if we look at this bunker, let's see if we did a good enough job. Not too bad. You can see this one is another blend shape that we didn't add this yet. There we go. And then we don't have our bunker material set up yet, so we haven't done any of that. But you can now see that it's not bleeding outside into the rough there. So that works out okay. Now I know this doesn't look very good so far, but this video is just meant to show kind of the setup and how you set up your Photoshop file and make all those goes. This is a water base. I didn't mention this white shape. That's water. I'm not going to use my satellite for water bases. I will do a separate water-based video. Maybe I'll get to that next year right away. But whether you watch this one first or my other sat shading video on the fold, watch them together, see how I'm going to clean up and use vert painting with sat shading to my advantage, and that should get you rolling. Sat shading is amazing. It is supremely difficult to get right. You can do it very basically with just your sat images. I have done Photoshop sat shaders that are 60 or 80 layers deep. I mean, it gets a little ridiculous at times. I could probably do a better job, but that's just something like the fold where there's fictional holes that I had to paint the satellite completely. It starts getting out of control, but it's incredibly powerful. It's also incredibly daunting and difficult to do well. But watch the other video and that'll give you far more depth on how to combine it with vert painting. It's not one or the other. Vert painting with sat shading is always going to give you the most amazing customization and control. I hope that was helpful. I know there are other sat videos on how to set up the basics. But thanks for watching. Follow me for some more. We'll keep rolling. Hope to do more videos.